This is Mike, and he is a close bodyguard of the US president. That evening, he was ordered to escort the president to a dinner. However, an unexpected incident occurred. A broken tree fell onto the car carrying the president. The driver lost control and crashed into the railing of the bridge. Half of the car was left suspended in mid-air, swaying in the cold wind. At this critical moment, Mike rushed to rescue the president from the car, but the president's spouse, along with the car, fell into the freezing river and perished. Because of this failure, he was transferred to another department which he didn't enjoy. Not long after, the president welcomed the South Korean Prime Minister at the White House. While the representatives of the two countries were in discussions, an army aircraft was toward the White House. The Ministry of Defense promptly dispatched 2 fighter jets to inspect and continuously warned the opposing side to stay away from the White House. As a result, not only did the aircraft ignore the warnings, but it also started firing wildly. The 2 fighter jets were immediately shot down in response. The entire White House security staff sprang into action. They escorted the president into the secure chamber beneath the basement. Then, they activated the anti-aircraft missile system within the White House and urgently contacted the Air Force Rescue Center. Simultaneously, the aircraft soared over the White House skies, eliminating any obstacles in its path, descending close to the ground, and initiating an assault on those present below. The White House swiftly engaged its anti-aircraft system, firing numerous missiles aimed at the aircraft. However, the pilot had prepared well in advance, employing the anti-missile system to thwart the missile attack. Subsequently, the enemy aircraft initiated a fresh sweep. White House security personnel fell victim to casualties and injuries. In the critical moment, fighter jets arrived in a timely fashion, launching an assault from behind the enemy plane. A missile accurately homed in on its tail, causing the aircraft to lose balance and crash directly into an adjacent field. Observing this scene through the window, Mike comprehended the danger his president faced. Without hesitation, he abandoned his post and sprinted toward the White House. As he reached the gate, Mike's keen eyes spotted 2 suspicious men. They were carrying backpacks, advancing toward the White House fence. His years of experience told him that they could be terrorists. Thus, Mike shot and killed one of them, but the other managed to activate a bomb, causing a section of the White House fence to collapse. Right at that moment, a masked group of terrorists armed with weapons began their assault on the White House. They relentlessly fired ahead. The handful of surviving security personnel within the White House managed to take them down one by one. Although Mike was rushing to provide support due to the significant number of terrorists, the security personnel were gradually overwhelmed and defeated. Inside the secure room, the bodyguard beside the South Korean Prime Minister unexpectedly fired at the security personnel. It turned out that Kang was the mastermind. He had taken control of both presidents and the Prime Minister along with other government officials. The White House was plunged into chaotic turmoil both inside and out. Amid this crisis, a garbage truck stopped outside the White House fence. A terrorist inside the truck opened the door, revealing a heavy-caliber gun. They unleashed a frenzy of gunfire, resulting in a significant loss of security personnel's lives. At this point, the White House was left with just one last line of defense. However, the terrorists launched another missile that obliterated the large doors. The terrorists on the ground quickly got up upon seeing this and moved inside the building. They checked every single room without sparing a single life. In no time, the White House was completely under their control. Shortly thereafter, the rescue forces from the Ministry of Defense arrived at the White House. Confronted with the grim scene before them, they couldn't easily launch a rescue operation due to the immediate threat posed by the terrorists. The Department of Defense suddenly received a video call from the White House's secure room. The South Korean Prime Minister appeared on the screen. Just as the Defense Department was about to inquire about the situation within the White House, the South Korean president was shot in the head from behind by Kang. He used the life of the US president as leverage to force the Department of Defense to withdraw all troops from around the White House. Then, he disabled the power system from within and turned the White House plunged into darkness. At the same time, Mike managed to make his way inside the White House. After neutralizing the terrorists one by one, he reached the monitoring room of the White House and deactivated all surveillance cameras to proceed with his actions. At that moment, he inadvertently discovered a photo of the president's son in the possession of one of the terrorists. It appeared that the terrorists were after the president's son. Drawing from his years of experience, Mike made his way to the president's office and retrieved the president's satellite phone. The first thing he did was to contact the Department of Defense, reporting the current situation inside the White House and promising that he would do everything in his power to support the president's rescue mission. Kang, on the other hand, made another call outside, this time demanding that the US withdraw military forces deployed in South Korea. If they didn't comply, he threatened to kill every person, including the president. As both presidents were being held captive inside the White House, the Department of Defense had no choice but to temporarily transfer presidential authority to the Speaker of the House, Alan Trumbull, to take charge of the ongoing rescue efforts. Inside the safe room, Kang started interrogating the Chief of Staff, coercing him to disclose the missile launch codes. With these 3 codes, Kang could manipulate a nuclear bomb with enough power to destroy the United States. These 3 code segments were distributed separately to the President, the Department of Defense, and the Chief of Staff. Unfortunately, all 3 individuals were now under Kang's captivity. Didn't want the Chief of Staff to sacrifice, so the President ordered him to reveal the first code segment. He knew that by withholding the 3rd code segment, he could prevent the system from being activated and ensure the nuclear bomb wouldn't detonate. After Kang inputted the first code, the Department of Defense received a missile system activation alert. Trumbull immediately contacted Mike, stressing that he must stop Kang from activating the system, or there would be unimaginable consequences. The president was resolute in not revealing the code, even if it cost him his life. However, if Kang were to capture the president's son and use the child's life as a bargaining chip, the situation would become more complicated. Given the circumstances, Mike's top priority was to quickly locate the president's son and safely extract the child from the White House. He immediately began his search for the boy. However, all of Mike's actions were closely monitored by Kang through the surveillance cameras, and he ordered someone to eliminate Mike as soon as possible. After a while, Mike managed to locate the boy hiding behind a wall, but just as they were about to leave, the terrorists caught up to them and began wildly shooting at the wall. After a fierce battle, Mike led the child to an air duct, through which the boy managed to escape. Next, Mike relayed this information to the Department of Defense, urging them to prepare for the rescue mission. Meanwhile, a terrorist found Mike's location. Fortunately, Mike swiftly incapacitated him from behind. As the president's son emerged from the duct, the military forces moved in for the rescue. At that moment, everyone could finally breathe a sigh of relief. When Kang found out about that, he filled with anger, tightened his grip around the neck of the defense secretary, relentlessly pressuring her to reveal the second code of the system. However, she chose death over divulging the information. The president, unable to bear witness, ordered her to reveal the code he knew. Finally, she disclosed the second code of the system. As soon as the second password was activated, Trumbull could no longer stay still. Through satellite surveillance, he observed the terrorist group beginning to lose their vigilance. He decided to deploy a SEAL Special Forces team to launch an aerial assault on the White House. On the other side, Mike managed to capture 2 of the terrorist operatives and then used extreme methods to force them to reveal Kang's true identity. It turned out that Kang is a North Korean ultranationalist mastermind disguised as a South Korean ministerial aide. He desires to bring down the entire United States and South Korea. It was at this moment that Kang's subordinates discovered the SEAL Special Forces team sent by Trumbull. Immediately, he ordered his subordinates to activate anti-aircraft weapons. As the terrorist pressed the activation button and left, Mike also arrived on the scene. Upon discovering the activated weapons, Mike urgently called for the cancellation of the raid operation, but it was too late to communicate. 6 helicopters had already reached the White House, but before they could attack, they were hit by intense missile strikes from anti-aircraft launchers. The SEAL team suffered heavy casualties. Out of the 6 helicopters, 5 were destroyed. This action by Trumbull infuriated Kang, leading him to fatally shoot the vice president. Following this, Kang threatened Trumbull, demanding that within the next hour, all armed forces be withdrawn and a helicopter be prepared outside. If not, he would kill the president. Upon hearing this, Trump immediately contacted Mike and instructed him to do everything possible to rescue the president, otherwise he must have to comply with Kang's demands. Mike used a computer to establish communication with Kang, taunting him. This fueled Kang's anger, prompting him to drag the Secretary of Defense outside for execution. He was about to shoot her in front of everyone, but before he could fire, Mike attacked him in the darkness. Mike's gunshot resulted in the death of the terrorist next to him. Seizing the opportunity, the Secretary of Defense managed to escape and was retrieved by the US military outside. Kang had to retreat into the safe room. At this point, the 1-hour deadline set by Kang was rapidly approaching. In consideration of the president's safety, Trumbull had no choice but to agree to Kang's terms. He sent a helicopter to the designated location. Soon after, Kang ordered his subordinates to wear black masks to cover their heads, and one by one, they emerged from the White House. The troops stationed outside the White House hoped to find an opportunity to rescue the president, but unexpectedly, a group of individuals walked out from the White House, each with their head covered. To prevent any harm to the president, Trumbull commanded that no one should open fire and could only watch them depart. However, not long after the helicopter took off, it suddenly exploded. Just when everyone was plunged into despair, Mike realized that it was all a stage play. Kang's goal was to destroy the United States and South Korea, and since the nuclear warheads had not been activated, there was no way he could die. Indeed, as Mike had predicted, both the president and Kang were still safe in the safe room within the White House. Even though the president hadn't revealed the passcode, they managed to deduce the final code. Kang set a countdown to launch the missiles in the next 5 minutes to obliterate everything. After completing the plan, Kang attempted to escape through a prepared tunnel. However, halfway through, he encountered Mike, who was approaching with a gun. Seeing his enemy, Mike immediately subdued all of Kang's henchmen. During the confrontation, the president was inadvertently shot by Kang in the abdomen. Mike rushed to rescue the president, but after a fierce battle, he was forced by Kang against a wall, choking him and rendering him immobile. In a critical moment, Mike countered with a left punch and then used his leg to pin Kang to the ground. Finally, he picked up a knife from the ground and thrust it through Kang's head. In the end, with the assistance of everyone from the Department of Defense, Mike successfully disabled the nuclear system to save the world. He escorted the president out of the White House, and everyone applauded him, hailing him as a hero of the nation. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support our channel.